The movie opens with a man stabbing a knife into his leg. As he heads towards a hut, his daughter Tantri intervenes, pleading with him to stop. However, despite her efforts, the man continues, crying, and then stabs himself in the shoulder. When the daughter questions his actions, he starts chanting a prayer for her protection. However, a sinister entity is revealed behind him, and the entity forces him to end his life by burning himself to death. Years later, we see Tantri moving into her school's dormitory, when suddenly she hears someone asking for help. Now, when she opens the door of her room, we see a demonic hand on her shoulder, but it turns out to be another student. They check her room, and one of them asks her if she is alone here. They introduce themselves as Faye and Asta, and then leave there telling her to enjoy herself and be careful. Later, Tantri discovers a photograph in her room depicting 5 individuals, and she observes the words "hate you" written on the back. However, the photo accidentally slips from her hand and lands under the bed. Now, when she attempts to retrieve it, she becomes terrified upon glimpsing a ghost on the other side of the bed, only for it to vanish the next moment. We then see Asta, who hears strange noises in her room and gets shocked to find herself slitting her throat with a glass. During dinner, Tantri questions if they've ever witnessed anything unusual here. Faye asks for clarification, to which Tantri explains that since arriving, she's been noticing unfamiliar occurrences. She further questions if any incidents have occurred in the past, to which they reveal that, since last year, 2 of their friends have gone missing. Asta discloses that Aram was picked up by his father and vanished, and Faye adds that their friend Luki is believed to have committed suicide, evidenced by a handwritten letter found in his locker. However, Asta points out that even if it was a suicide, Luki's body remains undiscovered. Reza then arrives there, and Faye introduces him to Tantri, telling him she is a new student here. Later, while Tantri is taking a bath, she suddenly senses someone's presence there. She peeks out scared but doesn't see anyone there, which makes her confused. But we see someone standing behind her. Tantri finishes her bath and leaves there, and soon after, a female figure follows her. Meanwhile, in her room, Faye hears peculiar voices emanating from her radio, resembling a spell chant. Simultaneously, her room door mysteriously opens on its own, and when she walks out to investigate, we see a shadow figure moving behind another door. The door to her room slams shut, and upon attempting to open it, she discovers it's locked. After a brief struggle, she succeeds in unlocking it and re-enters her room, only to sense an eerie presence outside the window. Faye approaches the window and gets horrified, seeing herself with bleeding eyes outside. On the other hand, we see Tantri looking at her dad's photo, and she remembers him telling her that her mother left a necklace for her. She falls asleep, remembering her mother, but suddenly she is transported to another location, where she sees Luki, who is saying that he regrets what he did. He is writing the same letter that was found in his locker, and then he hears the same mysterious spell that Faye encountered on the radio. And disturbingly, he inserts a tool into his ear, and a menacing entity is revealed, forcing him to perform this act. Luki dashes out of the room in terror, screaming, and abruptly halts near a well. As he turns, the entity instructs him to believe, asserting that only then will its spell take effect. Despite Tantri's attempt to intervene, Luki proceeds to slit his throat with a knife and plunges into the well. Tantri abruptly wakes up in her room and gets startled to find blood on her hands. Later, Tantri discovers Luki's decomposed body in the same well, and noticing a guy observing her, she leaves there. We then see that Faye and Asta are scared, and Faye shares about her last night's experience. Asta asks her not to think much about it, and seeing Tantri passing, she asks her to join them. She says she heard that she found Luki's body, to which Tantri reveals that she saw it in her dream. Asta asks if she can find Luki. Can she do the same to Aram? Later, Mahesh stops Tantri, asking how she knew the location of Luki's body. Reza pushes him back, and they both fight, but Asta stops them and takes Reza away, saying they have something important coming up. After this, all 4 go to Aram's house, and find that the house looks abandoned. They all try to peek inside the house, and suddenly a ghost appears in front of Tantri, prompting her to break the glass, and her hand gets injured in this. Reza checks it and calls Faye there, who ties a scarf on her hand to stop the bleeding. Meanwhile, Asta finds a door open and tells them she found a way in. They enter the house and find all the drawers and cupboards open, and Riza says it must be Mahesh, looking for something or eliminating evidence. Simultaneously, Tantri enters a trance-like state and perceives the spirit of a girl. Following her guidance, Tantri enters a room where a bed moves autonomously, unveiling a symbol drawn on the floor, and as she kneels and bends in front of it, a book appears there. Here Faye notices that Tantri is not with them, and we see Tantri reading the same spell from that book. Asta intervenes by placing her hand on Tantri's shoulder, snapping her out of the trance. Now, as they all gather in that room, they realize that they have been cursed all this time, and Aram has been trying to harm them. Asta inquires how they can put an end to all this, to which Tantri says she has nothing to do with this. However, Asta points out that since she came, she is the one who found all of this. She led them here and found this spell, and still, she thinks she has nothing to do with this? She says she is the chosen one who can stop this spell, and they must complete this ritual now. Tantri says it's useless because the dead can't come back alive, but Faye requests her, saying they have nothing to lose if they try. Tantri reluctantly agrees, expressing her intent to try. Subsequently, she distributes pieces of glass to the group, and they intertwine hands, causing their hands to be cut and their blood to fall onto the symbol. Tantri then re-enters a trance state and begins reciting the spell, with the rest of the group following her. The entity says Tantri doesn't deserve to call it, and asks for its help. Everything she requested has triggered the activation of the selected curse spell through the scent of virgin blood, binding her as a servant to the devil. The entity materializes there and reveals that it has placed a curse upon the 5 sinners. It declares its intent to claim the wives, daughters, and descendants, ensuring a life haunted by its curse spell until death. The entity offers to lift both the curse and its spell if Tantri agrees to come with it. Tantri pleads for the entity to stop and questions how many more lives it requires. In response, the entity asserts that Tantri has cultivated decay from her own mistakes and declares its intent to claim everything she possesses, emphasizing that it is all Tantri has. They then drop Asta to her house at her request, and Tantri tells Reza that many strange things have not been answered until now. Like, why did Aram's spell stop only at Luki? Even he lost and also died. Reza says it's good then, but Faye asks him if he realizes they are in danger, to which he questions why she is dwelling on it when it hasn't happened yet. Meanwhile, we see Asta in the process of cutting a piece of her uncle's shirt and collecting hair from his beard. Suddenly he wakes up and questioning her about not responding to his text. He expresses loneliness without her. Just then he notices scissors in her hand and asks her, "What is that?" He snatches the scissors from her hand and holds her hair, and again asks her what is that for. He then throws her on the table and sexually harasses her. On the other hand, as Reza drops off Faye and Tantri, he becomes terrified upon noticing the entity behind his car through the back camera. Faye and Tantri quickly rush out, while the entity attacks Reza. However, when they approach him, the entity mysteriously disappears. Concerned, they ask him what's wrong, but he says he is fine. Later, we see Faye scared and crying in her room when the demonic hand approaches and attacks her, and with her screams, the scene cuts here. Meanwhile, Tantri goes into the trance again, and she gets transported into Asta's house, where she sees Asta's uncle getting strangled by his oxygen pipe, and we see that entity killing him in the mirror. Tantri gets transported back to her house, and she finds that oxygen pipe in her hands. She goes to Asta and asks her to give her the book, and when she asks why, Tantri says she knows what she just did. She sees that both Faye and Asta are using that book and asks them, do they know what they are doing? They refuse to give her the book, and Faye reveals that Tantri's uncle has been sexually harassing her since childhood, and she has attempted suicide. She also reveals that Asta was pregnant and had an abortion. Asta asks Tantri to leave, to which she says she is concerned about her, but there is no need for another victim, and she will not leave until the book is in her hands. Asta asks if she doesn't want to return it, what she can do. Tantri says she won't help her anymore, to which Asta says she doesn't need her help, and then asks her to leave. Later that night, a female spirit appears in Tantry's room, and it approaches and requests her help. The next day, Mahesh approaches Tantry, and he asks her, did she got kicked out of their circle? He asks her if she knows the case of Aram's disappearance, and tells her it's all their fault. She says she knows and asks, what did they do? And Mahesh discloses that Aram fell victim to sexual harassment by both Reza and Luki. Tantry is shocked by this revelation, and Mahesh adds that he heard the two of them had a bet on who could sleep with Aram. Reza won the bet and proceeded to take an explicit picture of her and send it to the whole college. Meanwhile, Asta starts choking, and everyone is taken aback when a piece of glass emerges from her throat. Despite the shock, Faye suggests they head home, but Asta tells them to go on. Mahesh shows her photos he took of Tantry, and she is stunned to observe a recurring presence beside her in each image, and she notices that it's Aram. Meanwhile, driven by jealousy upon seeing Tantry with Mahesh, Asta enters Tantry's room, accompanied by Faye. Asta proceeds to take a photo of Tantry along with her hair from the bathroom, and when Faye tries to stop her, Asta insists that as her best friend, Faye should support her actions. Outside, Mahesh reveals Aram's photos to Tantry, and she is startled to observe the entity consistently present behind her in each picture. Tantry discloses that the entity is Surugana, and the scene shifts to Asta, who is performing a ritual using Tantry's belongings. Faye attempts to stop Asta and urges her to open the door. Unexpectedly, the door swings open, unveiling a fiercely enraged Asta who appears to be possessed. Now, before Faye can understand the situation, Asta seizes her hair, forcibly pulls it out, and promptly slams the door shut. In an attempt to escape, Faye flees the area, but Surugana follows her. Reza observes in shock as Faye levitates in the air, and the entity confronts Faye, reciting her spells, and cruelly forces her to gouge out her own eyes with her hands. Meanwhile, Tantry tells Mahesh about Aram's book. She says Asta was looking for that book, and that's why she invited her to Aram's house. He asks her, where is that book now? But suddenly, Tantry goes into a trance again and gets transported to a remote location where she hears someone calling for help. Investigating further, she's horrified to hear screams emanating from a house and witness 5 men sexually harassing a woman. To her astonishment, the woman looks at Tantry and smiles, revealing herself to be none other than Surugana. After some time, Tantry notices Surugana outside, standing beneath a tree, inscribing the names of those men in a spellbook. She throws the book on the ground and cuts her hand with a nail, causing her blood to spill onto the pages. Subsequently, a fire erupts, and Surugana begins levitating in the air, cursing the lives of the 5 men. She prophesies that the Chosen One will become her devil slave, and she will torment the wives, daughters, and offspring of the 5 sinners, haunting them until their demise. As she levitates higher, Surugana recites the same spell, and suddenly her body is engulfed in flames. Tantry then abruptly awakens in her room, and when Mahesh asks her what's wrong, she reveals that she saw it. She was made drunk by several people, and then they took turns sexually harassing her. Just before Surugana set herself on fire, she saw her inscribing the names of those men in the book she found at Aram's house, and shockingly, one of the names she wrote was her grandfather. Mahesh suggests that the spell may have stopped but reactivated when Aram was depressed and heard the whisper of the spell again to take revenge on Luki. He believes that the apparition of Aram that Tantry saw is attempting to ask her for help, and their task now is to make sure where Aram is. Meanwhile, Surugana appears behind Asta and says the spell summoned her. We then see Tantry and Mahesh inside Aram's house, and as Mahesh goes in to investigate, Surugana appears behind Tantry. However, when Tantry turns around, there's no one there, and we witness Surugana attempting to attack Tantry from behind, but an unseen force prevents her. At that moment, Mahesh returns, and Tantry realizes that her necklace is protecting her. She informs Mahesh that Surugana is present, and suddenly the window glass shatters, causing Mahesh to collapse on the ground. Tantry tries to wake him up, but finds a glass piece pierced on his neck, and thinking that he is dead, she begins crying, saying, "Don't leave her alone." Just then, Tantry hears Aram's voice pleading for help, and she sees Aram's spirit pointing towards a room. Tantri follows her, but is transported to Aram's house, where she witnesses Aram in the midst of performing a ritual. But her grandfather intervenes, preventing her from completing it. He restrains her in another room, apologizing and explaining that he has to do this to prevent her from harming herself. Suddenly, Surugana's spells resonate in the room, and she lifts Aram's grandfather into the air, throwing him against the ceiling. And as his blood drips, Aram consumes it. Tantri comes out of the trance and gets shocked to see that Aram is still alive. She immediately tries to free her, but then Asta arrives there, holding Mahesh at knife point. Tantri gets up and notices Asta wearing Aram's necklace, which means she knows the cause of the incident so far. She tries to wake Asta up and says she knows she can't hurt Mahesh because she loves her. However, despite Tantri's efforts to save Mahesh's life, Asta stabs the knife in her neck and throws him on the floor. Shortly after, Asta regains consciousness and is shocked by what she has done. However, she is once again possessed, compelled to stand up, and Surugana forces her to slit her own neck with her hands, leading to her tragic demise. After this, Surugana possesses Aram and frees her from her bondage. She then begins cursing Tantri and warns that if she attempts to break her curse through her offspring, she will break it again. Then, she will break it until they are alone again, and asks for her mercy. Tantri takes the knife that Asta used and stabs Aram in the heart. She apologizes to her, but Aram thanks her for releasing her from this curse. Now, after 1 week, when Tantri returns to the dormitory, she finds that Reza has been arrested for sexual violence, which resulted in the victim losing his life. Her warden comes there and hands her over her dad's photograph, saying she has replaced the frame. Tantri recalls her father telling her that when her mother was about to give birth to her, she was unwell. The situation demanded a choice. Either her mother or she could survive. Her mother chose to save Tantri, a testament to her deep love. Her father then asks if she still remembers the prayer he used to read for her. Together, they recite the same prayer, revealing that it is the same prayer her father recited at the beginning of the movie before his tragic death. Next, we observe Tantri with the book, deciding to throw it into the fireplace. Simultaneously, Faye is in a psychiatric hospital due to self-harm. She hears the spell again, leading to her screaming as her eyes start bleeding. Meanwhile, under the spell's influence, Reza tragically takes his own life by repeatedly slamming his head against the bars. We then see Tantri on a bus back home, shocked to see the book in her own hands. And as she turns around, she sees that everyone on her bus is dead. At the end, a veiled woman is in Aram's room. She turns around and her eyes turn red, and we can only imagine this means the cycle's begun again, and there's going to be a sequel. Thanks for facing the frights with us. If you survived this video, drop a like, summon that subscribe button, and brace yourself for more horror. Until next time, stay spooked.